So for those who have been in the Q space for a while, there's been some times we've kind of gone through some of this, and we talked about the motivations. But it's very important to have this reminder for the folks that are new. And so one of the things that people ask when we're talking about Quilibrium is, what is Quilibrium doing? Like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What is unique about Quilibrium? What is the utility token intended to do, and so on. And so the first thing to keep in mind is that from a thesis that we're talking about, we consider the internet to currently be under a multi-sided attack. I just mentioned it with the legislation that has been ongoing with the UK. These things are important to fight. And the attacks are coming from so many different domains. They come from our identity, personal storage, and communication providers, our ISPs, cloud providers, and, of course, government forces. And all of this combined has resulted in this multi-sided attack that leaves us wondering, how do we fight this? And for people who have been cypherpunks for a very long time, one of the things that, of course, comes up naturally as a consequence of that discussion is, well, why don't we just use crypto to solve this? And there's something really important in that, because crypto may be able to provide some technologies that are solutions to this problem. Crypto also brings some problems that come along with those potential solutions. Primarily that the movement to fight back has been co-opted. Specifically, let's talk about some of the major protocols and how this has happened. So, of course, the original, Bitcoin, I don't know why it disappeared. That was weird. Bitcoin, Solana, and Ethereum. And out of these, Bitcoin has been co-opted essentially through miner consolidation. Essentially, there are effectively 6 mining pools that remain that have significant influence. And by consequence, this means that any sort of ability to enhance the protocol, improve the protocol, that might be at the detriment of those specific mining operations effectively cannot move forward. But even if there was enough of a pushback to move it forward, or people just universally agreed that the miners in these protocols don't matter, we're going to move forward and choose this hard fork as the new, what is officially Bitcoin, we have the problem of Bitcoin not solving surveillance, and also, most importantly, the amount of Bitcoin that has been accumulated by just a small handful of parties in the form of ETFs, in the form of like very large companies that have basically made it their entire thesis, like MicroStrategy, has resulted in a significant quantity of the protocol's overall value captured by individuals who would very much not like to see things change, because if they see these things change, it potentially damages the things that they have vested interests in keeping exactly the way they are. On the Ethereum front, we've also seen the same kind of behavior of capture through the use of exchanges. This is the meme that says, never ask a woman her age, never ask a man his salary, never ask Coinbase how much of a percentage of the total staked ETH is theirs. This is just one of the things that comes into play with these protocols, and the nature of how much is actually controlled by just a handful of individuals or individual companies. And so this has been something that is considerably harmful to the overall decentralization of Ethereum as a protocol, and is one of the things that we've had to keep in mind as we've designed this protocol. The other is that they've also made some serious blunders architecturally. One of the things that they had planned to do after they had gotten past the merge was to support sharding the network. And over time, instead of actually trying to discuss how to make the shards work or revisit the architecture that was not viable, to be honest, they just essentially acquiesced that, oh, there's L2s and the L2s are doing well now, so let's just actually prioritize these L2s and helping them grow. And so what has happened as a consequence? You can see the actual value flow, like the number of overall tokens and overall mind share has basically migrated into these L2s, and a lot of these L2s are centralized. And one of those L2s, actually 2 of these L2s coming up with Kraken's Inc., are actually run by exchanges. And this is something that is essentially becoming a deeply centralizing force of Ethereum itself. But on top of all this, their vision collectively, whether you're talking about the L2s or you're talking about Ethereum itself, has been completely narrowed in scope. Every single time you hear a conversation, they're talking about managing wallets or accounts, account abstraction. They're talking about launching tokens. Everything is talking about tokens. And it's easy to feel like, if you've been in this space for a long time, that tokens, well, I mean, tokens are the whole point of crypto, right? But not really. When you start to actually go back to the history of crypto, specifically when you go back to the history of Bitcoin, and there were early explorations in alternative protocol designs or cooperative protocol designs with Bitcoin, like BitDNS, these people were not actually thinking about tokens. They were thinking about how do we create completely decentralized infrastructure pieces of the internet. The way that things work right now, they're technically decentralized in the context that you've got multiple servers all over the world communicating with one another, but when you actually trace, follow the money, it ends up being concentrated into a handful of just a few individual companies, which gets back to our talk about the multi-sided fight for the web. And so these early pioneers in the space were talking about broader ideas, broader protocols, things that were not remotely related to tokens. And you can actually see, like if you go back to the Bitcoin talk forums, you can actually see those discussions talking about like BitDNS, where the idea was to actually basically use Bitcoin as the overall security layer, providing that proof of work that was creating tokens, but it also establishes the right to create DNS names on BitDNS. And these types of ideas have weirdly fallen to the wayside. You do see some people talking about DPEN as this kind of modernization of it, but when you actually follow those discussions to their logical end, it always comes back around to talking about, launching a token for every single thing. And this idea that everything has to be tokenized is basically a cargo culting mindset. It's not thinking broadly about how can crypto solve these problems. It's thinking how can we make crypto be the concentration of these problems. It's a very broken ideology, and it's because people aren't willing to think outside of the box. And so the last stage of this co-option that has happened is talking about what's happened with Solana. You've seen recently in the news about the Libra coin launch and how much of a disaster that was, and it revealed, of course, like the deep, dark tendrils of the Cabal casino that has been actively infiltrating every single token launch that has been major, and then extracting, literally, even in the case of the Libra coin, one of the guys, Hayden Davis, was actually saying, yes, this is going to be a mass extract. Like, they are actively extracting money from the ecosystem at everyone else's detriment, and they are reveling in it. And this is just, further exacerbation of existing problems with this focus on tokens. But to make matters worse, instead of actually trying to bring meaningful value outside of just coin launches and stuff, there's certain protocols that have been stoking the fire and actively trying to encourage more of this to happen on their network. And then they've gotten into these pissing matches with other protocols and the L2s on those protocols that they're not the place to do this. And it's kind of a weird thing to think about, because why, after this disaster just happened, are they wanting more of this disaster to happen? It is not a positive sum event. It is basically turning crypto into a zero-sum PvP financial chicken casino game. And that's just not what we were originally fighting for. And last but not least, by consequence of all of this, you've started to see a huge sea of bad actors emerge. There's been bad actors historically every step of the way with really any broadly pioneered space. It just happens by consequence of something new, novel, hard to understand, and by consequence you get people who latch onto it and exploit that information asymmetry. But what's different about this generation is instead of having a principled set of individuals that are fighting back against this and speaking out against it, you have some of the people who are actively being one of the largest financiers of this the day after the event had happened, actively encouraging for more of it to happen. And so why not crypto is, well, pretty self-evident. So instead, we had to think back to first principles. And the current thesis of crypto, even on the good side, can't win this fight, because at the end of the day, it is strictly all cargo culted from this idea that a blockchain is how everything must work. And the linearization of all content into singular blocks of transactions, especially with execution caps, it only succeeds at producing limited financialized applications, not internet scale applications. You can't put the entire web on a blockchain. It isn't possible because there's intrinsic limits to how large that can scale as a data structure. It'd be like trying to put an entire database into S3, for example, if you're talking about traditional web application building. You can't do it because it's not built for that. And so the best thing that you can actually get out of it is a decentralized, transparent public ledger. Great, if that's what you want to build, if you want to build a spreadsheet accelerator that is trustless, great. Crypto has done that so far. But if you want to build something that replaces and secures the broader web, you have to think much deeper and much more outside the box and come up with new primitives that can actually fulfill this. And so that's what Quilibrium is. It's an alternative thesis to crypto. And there's also a video that I've done when I was giving a talk at Coinbase talking about what we've been building and the parallels from history, from the Homebrew Computing Club, and how that relates to how we're seeing the same bit of history repeating in crypto. We're revisiting those first principles and thinking about how we can coordinate the network with parallelized private execution for instant finality at global scale without having to succumb to building on a blockchain. Because again, a blockchain can't scale to fulfill this aim.